Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us. It's National Signing Day. Doesn't quite feel like National Signing Day, but I would say for Georgia that's not necessarily a bad thing because a lot of good things have happened for Georgia, so we'll cover a lot of that ground here over the course of our time. And special guest joins us today here as well. The former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, he has typically joined us each week as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. Well, Jake today is going to join us live. That's not something that he typically does, but today Jake will be with us live here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. We're looking forward to doing that with Jake Fromm on the program today. Also looking forward to getting back to your comments again before it's all said and done as a part of our R.S. Andrews cooldown. We'll get there before we're done, and we'll keep our eye on everything else that happens. Obviously, Terry Bussey right here at this time, 10 a.m., the five-star athlete from Texas, set to make his decision. Spoiler alert, we don't exactly expect it to be Georgia, but we'll tell you who it is here when that announcement does go down. And we'll talk about Carson Beck's Lamborghini and the hysteria that seems to be building around that. We'll have some fun with that here coming up in just a little bit. We're glad to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I don't get to be a newsman on this show very much. You know, the idea of the anchor man, kind of sit in the chair. I just like to kind of pop my papers on my desk. I feel like that's the kind of thing you see news anchors do a lot. Don't get to do a lot of breaking news. We do have breaking news here off the top of the program. Now, the problem with breaking news is like 99.9% of the people who watch or listen to this show do so after it airs live. But for those of you who are joining us live right here at 10 a.m., as expected, as the smart folks like to say, Terry Bussey, the five-star athlete from Texas, has kept his commitment to Texas A&M. So some of you were kind of aware of what was going on here. A lot of you probably were. There was really only one name kind of out there, even as a possibility for Georgia. That was Terry Bussey. Bussey had recently taken a visit to Georgia. Not a lot of buzz coming out of the visit. That's typically a sign. The old adage in recruiting is, if you don't know, it isn't you. Meaning if you haven't heard for sure your guy's coming to you, that means he's probably going somewhere else. I think most of the folks pretty close to Georgia were fairly confident Bussey was likely going somewhere else. There was some chance he might flip over to LSU with Corey Raymond kind of back in the fold there as defensive backs coach. I guess Dante Williams, Georgia's new cornerbacks coach, we're told had a little bit of a relationship with Bussey, but ultimately the school that had him, able to hold on to him, perhaps all of this was just sort of a show to make it seem like A&M got a win on a recruit they already had, or maybe this was about NIL leverage. Ultimately, I don't really care. But Bussey is staying at Texas A&M, not coming to Georgia, which that means, as the phrase is sometimes used, that's probably about a full lid. Georgia probably doesn't have anything else to think about here on National Signing Day. And on the one hand, I don't know. I guess I'm a little nostalgic for what National Signing Day used to be. We're going to have Jake Fromm coming up on the show a little bit later on. I'm going to talk to Jake about the fact that he was actually a part of the last signing class ever that all took place in February. National Signing Day in 2017 was February only. By the 2018 class, we started having the early signing period. We've been doing it that way ever since. There's a part of me that sort of misses the old school traditional National Signing Day. I guess I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, so maybe it's not that surprising that I feel that way. And, it's a little bit easy to kind of have these really sort of fond memories of the way things used to be and the crazy hysteria, and to be a little bit melancholy maybe is the word about the fact that today is just not really that kind of day. It is National Signing Day, but it doesn't really feel much like National Signing Day. And then on the flip side of that, I also kind of caught myself considering this morning. While we can all lament about what National Signing Day here in February has become, the one thing we cannot complain about is what Georgia has become as a recruiting power. Now, consider this. I know this is going to seem a little bit vapid, but just hear me out nonetheless. Consider the fact that the one thing that is not in dispute today is that when the final sort of lid is put on this 2024 recruiting class, no one argues that Georgia will have the number one class. Mathematically, I believe it's impossible for anyone to catch them here right now. So we know for a fact that Georgia's going to have the number one class. So we may be a little bit disappointed into what this version of National Signing Day sort of deteriorated into, but there is no deterioration whatsoever when it comes to Georgia signing class. Georgia is number one, probably worth sort of reflecting on that here just for a moment. And I think that if you're a Georgia fan, there's sort of, I think, kind of an important takeaway that probably matters for you in terms of how Georgia goes about its business. Really kind of two things, I would say, that are probably pretty important when it comes to Georgia and how it is that, once again, Georgia has put together a big-time signing class, a number one ranked signing class. And all these guys, for the most part, there's a small handful who are still finishing up their regular high school and will join Georgia in a traditional way come May, June. But, like, the lion's share of this class, already early enrollees, many of them were bowl practice. A lot of these guys we saw with our own eyes going back to Miami and the Orange Bowl. It's just sort of a different age on all of this, but the results remain the same. Georgia continues to dominate in recruiting. And as far as like why that is and the overall mindset that Georgia has in place when it comes to signing day, a couple of years ago, Kirby Smart kind of talked about that. He was sort of asked about, all right, it's National Signing Day. You've kind of been here a lot. You've sort of done this a lot. What is it that makes signing day successful in your eyes, in your mindset, from your perspective? What is the definition of a successful National Signing Day? And since today is National Signing Day, the final moment of this 2024 class, let's go back in time and hear what Kirby Smart said back then.
A successful signing day is defined 4 years from now. I look backwards on that. I leave it to you guys to rate them because I can't compare somebody else's to ours because I don't really look at somebody else's. I only compare ours to what they do when they leave, not what they do when they arrive, how many of them graduate, how many wins they have, what kind of people they become, how they integrate into our culture is probably the best defining success quality. And hopefully they'll do that well. We'll onboard them well. And, I hate to say it, but, there's probably not a lot of difference in all these kids being signed. The difference is what you do with them. But people make it about who you sign, not what they become. And I'm a lot more interested in what, they become.
So I think what Kirby Smart is saying there is probably self-evidently true, but I do believe there are some things about National Signing Day that are perhaps more true than just what Kirby Smart's saying right there. What is the definition of a successful National Signing Day? I think it kind of comes down to two things. Clearly, for Georgia, it's a successful signing class, even if it's sort of a quiet National Signing Day. I think the reflection of this sort of starts with the fact that everything for Georgia right now just feels accelerated. Georgia has already done the work to take care of this class. Therefore, they're already thinking about 2025s. In fact, we've already talked about all the guys that Georgia's hosted in a couple of pretty important junior days here over the course of the last few weeks. Georgia, kind of content to be finished with its 2024 class. It's working ahead to 2025. It's working ahead to, develop the guys that it's already brought in for the 2024 class. As I mentioned before, many of these guys already in early enrollees. Many of these guys have already participated in their first Georgia practices. So in the current age which we live in, where things in February feel less dramatic than they used to, the definition of success on a day like this is just also different than it once was. I think National Signing Day, you want that to be a reflection of how well you've worked ahead, how far into the future you've been able to look ahead. What you don't want to be is kind of like I was in high school, sort of cramming and scrambling at the last minute to get something done, perhaps the way my son is in school right now maybe. But you don't want to be doing anything like that. You want to have taken care of your work. You want to have, as the old saying goes, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. You want to have worked hard in the past so that you can kind of relax and take it easy during the present. And it certainly seems like that's what Georgia's able to do. In fact, if you want to go back to this December when Kirby Smart was reflecting on some of those things, that's one of the things he talked about, the fact that Georgia, the work that it did back in the first opportunity to sign with this 2024 class, the work that it had been doing for a long period of time, finally came to fruition there on that December day. And on this February National Signing Day, that's an important thing to keep in mind, Kirby, from back then.
Obviously, it started, long before this time last year. We're really confident in our evaluations. We do a thorough job. I think somebody told me on here, I was looking at this before I came out here, I think 24 of maybe 28 or 29 guys worked out on our campus with our coaches. 25 of 28 guys were multi-sport athletes, 13 different states. number one player in maybe 4 or 5 different states. But more important than all that is the kind of kids they are. I'm excited to get them to come in and work. We've got, I really don't know, 8 or 9 guys here working with us that are competing, and hopefully more to come mid-year. I think it's somewhere like 23 guys coming mid-year, which seems to be the trend in all of college football, which is important because you cannot develop players if you don't have them here. You can't practice to develop the other players if you don't have enough depth here.
So I think what Kirby Smart's saying there is sort of a new definition of what makes National Signing Day successful during this time. National Signing Day is a day to be thankful for what you've done in the past and already thinking about the future. Georgia will spend more time probably, thinking about 2025, 2026 recruits today than it certainly will 2024's, and its thoughts about its 2024, recruits will all be about developing them as players because most of them, the lion's share of them, are already on campus. That's kind of a cool thing about this new version of National Signing Day. It's not perhaps as fun and dramatic as it would have been in the past, but in terms of how Georgia is navigating all of this, it is certainly a proper reflection of the overall success of the Georgia program. And that's, I guess, the final point to make about this there as well, is that when you see Georgia guaranteed of having the number one class, just sort of watching the final moments of this 2024 cycle play out, you're reminded of something that is, once again, I think an important statement to make, is that Georgia's making all of this look easy right now. Even though with the advent of NIL and the proliferation of the transfer portal, the actual process of acquiring talent is probably harder than it's ever been. The truth is, if Georgia's impacted by that, the look on the face of the coaches, the demeanor, their behavior as they're out and about on the recruiting trail, that doesn't seem to give you much indication of that. Georgia seems to be handling all of this as well as it handled whatever came before this in sort of the life of acquiring talent in college football. And going back to December, Kirby Smart also talked about that as well.
We have really gone with the model of going through the high school ranks, developing players. The way it's looking right now is somewhere around 40%, maybe 50%, maybe even 60% of our roster next year will be in the first 2 years of the program. And that's you got to have spring practice, you got to have development to do that. But a lot of credit goes to our staff. Our coaches have done a tremendous job in what is a extremely difficult time. But most of our class was done. I think this might have been the earliest class we've ever had the numbers committed, and really proud of them, and look forward to kind of indoctrinating these guys into our culture and getting them better.
Did you hear the way that Kirby Smart punched that phrase? Extremely difficult time, he said. We all know that's true because we follow college athletics. But if all you knew is what you know about Georgia, you wouldn't have any evidence whatsoever that this is an extremely difficult time for coaches, and then that some coaches are sort of tucking tail and running off to the NFL or into retirement or wherever else. They can't handle the pressure cooker that is the current landscape of talent acquisition. If all you knew about college football is what you know about these Georgia coaches, you would assume that things were just as easy as ever because Georgia is making it look just as easy as ever. Now, behind the scenes in real life, that's not exactly true, but Georgia certainly makes it look that way. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think that ought to make you feel pretty good today and certainly give you a sense of comfort that college football is challenging right now. And finding players out of high school or getting players out of the transfer portal or perhaps keeping those players from transferring somewhere else, it's never been more difficult. But Georgia finds a way to make it look easy. It may be a quiet National Signing Day for the Dogs today, but that quiet, drama-free mood that exists around the program, that is evidence of just how successful Georgia truly is. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you join us. First and 15, 945, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that across all video platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just so happy to have you as a part of our program and so thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And our friends over at Breda, Matt Breda, and the entire team there, nobody happier about the great success that Georgia has enjoyed during this 2024 recruiting cycle. Nobody happier about the fact the Dogs are on top. as the #1 recruiting class in America because Breda Pest Management is, as I said before, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means if you're going to a basketball game at Stegman Coliseum, or we got Diamond Dog baseball starting up here really soon, if you're going to Foley Field there, or any of the other athletic venues, when you're there, you can know that the same company that's keeping those venues, those stadiums, those arenas, those gyms, termite, pest, critter, bug-free, all that kind of stuff, they can do the same thing for your home there as well. And it's not just prestigious bragging rights you get from that. You're also going to get the thing for you that probably matters most of all, which is more money back in your pocket. Because if you're working with one of those termite companies, and you know what this feels like, you get the letter in the mail, the dreaded letter, cost of service is going up, even though your sense is the quality of service that fly-by-night company's been providing you, maybe it's going down, and yet somehow it keeps getting more expensive. That's not going to be your experience with Breda Pest Management. They've been in business since 1975. Think of it, 125 employees. This is like a true family company, lineage, legacy over the course of multiple generations of taking care of people, and they want to take care of you and put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch. So find them online. It's BredaPest.com. That's BREDA, BredaPest.com. All right. We're going to get Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. Live special conversation with Jake. We're looking forward to that. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse, and I want to try to have some fun with something here for a moment. So one of the things that you hear me say a little bit is the sort of wild nature of NIL, while on the one hand a little bit true, on the other hand probably a little bit exaggerated. And I think the story of Carson Beck and his new Lamborghini, which maybe you've seen online, and if you haven't, we're going to walk you through it here in a moment. I think this may be a little bit of an example of the kind of telephone game that sort of turns one thing and something else by the time it's all said and done. So let's see if we can kind of walk through this here a little bit. And by the way, it is not just me who sometimes kind of notices the sort of, I guess, exaggerated nature of this, and the fact that in the NIL age in which we live in, obviously it's a presence, but it's maybe not quite sometimes what it's described to be. There was actually a story at 247sports.com here this morning where recruits were able to speak anonymously about their own NIL experience. And one of the recruits that was quoted here, once again, not by name, I'll show you this on the screen, was able to sort of describe exactly what the feeling's like. So the writer says, what's real with NIL numbers and what isn't? He says, you can go ahead and trash any thoughts that most recruits are getting paid millions annually to attend a school. One of the anonymous recruits who's quoted says, people get paid to play, but the numbers that you're hearing are outrageous. People are just lying and pushing it past what it is. That's what a recruit told 247 Sports. So is it true that people are just lying with their NIL? Some of them might be, but at the same time, I think that some of this is probably not quite as nefarious as that. Some of this is just exaggerated, like an old school game of telephone, where somebody starts off whispering something. By the time it makes its way around the circle, it's been turned into something different. As I said before, the story that's out there right now that some people are just hysterical about Carson Beck and his Lamborghini, maybe this is an example of this. So let me show you this once again if you're watching on video on your screen. So Beck goes to a place called Atlanta Autos and gets himself a Lamborghini. So the dealership puts out, shout out to Carson Beck. He came through and not got just a Lambo truck, but he got the, whatever, it's Permanente or something like that, the really, really nice one. Obviously a very, very expensive vehicle, great-looking SUV. Atlanta Auto sort of puts that out. Now, let's talk about what we know here just for a moment. What we sort of know is that a guy like Carson Beck is very well aware of his value. His presence in a social media post kind of comes with some value, and a guy like Beck, who does have representatives, he is probably, now I don't know this for a fact, but I'm making a strong assumption here, probably not giving that away for free. That if Beck is cheesing with Atlanta Autos on Instagram, the idea that Beck would just do that without getting something out of the deal, that seems to be a little hard to square, just given the way in which representatives of quarterbacks like Beck or players like Beck around college football typically advise their clients. So if we're seeing Beck in an Atlanta Autos Instagram, I would say that the easiest, safest assumption is that this itself is some sort of endorsement deal. And oftentimes auto dealerships will trade a opportunity to drive a car via lease for an endorsement. You don't Beck doesn't own the car in all likelihood if this deal operates the way that a lot of these deals typically do. But he is allowed to drive it for a period of time. He can either come back and get a different vehicle or eventually just give it back and move on to the next phase of his, life. And the dealership will turn around and then sell the vehicle because that's just kind of the way this goes. That's typically the way things go. Beck is driving a Lamborghini from Atlanta Autos, but there's no evidence he actually purchased the vehicle. If anything, the presence of Beck on the social media post would lead you to believe this is likely an endorsement. And yet that's not necessarily the way this was discussed, because our friends over at the Players Lounge, not bad people, they've obviously got a job to do here. They're trying to tout the NIL value of Georgia players. They see the Beck photo they put out on X yesterday. Georgia quarterback Carson Beck purchases a near $300,000 Lamborghini, is it Urus Performante? So you can tell how much of a North Georgia redneck I am. I don't even know how to pronounce all this. But nonetheless, $300,000 vehicle. They give you the mind-blown emoji. That's what the Players Lounge puts out. Now, once again, Players Lounge, not bad people, but unless they've got the purchase and sale agreement in their hand, we don't have much evidence necessarily that Beck actually bought the car. All we know is Beck is driving the car via the Atlanta Autos Instagram piece. You follow me here thus far? But when people see the Players Lounge putting out that Beck purchased the vehicle, and purchased in this case may have been the wrong word to use, all of a sudden that gets grabbed and that gets kind of turned into something in the media. Our friends over at On3, once again, not bad people, like a lot of people that work there, but their national desk sees this Players Lounge tweet from the Atlanta Autos Instagram, and now they're writing about it as well. On Twitter, they put out Georgia quarterback Carson Beck recently purchased a Lamborghini Urus Performante. The model goes for $270,000. But while they're putting that there, their headline of the actual story, if you click into that, just says that he reportedly purchased it. So we go from, hey, Beck's driving a car, maybe he bought it, $300,000. National media sort of picks it up, and all of a sudden this gets turned into, well, here's Carson Beck, he's spending $300,000, and should an athlete like that be spending that kind of money, things like that. Clearly, I think you can see the path here of how a sort of a telephone game like this can sort of operate, where just because he's driving the car doesn't necessarily mean he bought the car. But when you see the way the various social media pieces around the world sort of pick this up, all of a sudden it sort of gets turned into one thing when it perhaps to start with maybe was something completely different. Now, the overall bottom line for me is whether Beck purchased it or he's leased it or he's getting it as an endorsement or anything like that, honestly, for Georgia, it may not be a bad thing to have a quarterback getting this kind of fame, this kind of attention. A little pizzazz around the Georgia program, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. As we talked to Connor Riley about yesterday, the idea that a Georgia quarterback and a Georgia program kind of being a little bit led by a little bit more of a well-known quarterback who has Heisman aspirations and first-round pick aspirations. For Georgia, from a branding standpoint, that may not necessarily be a bad thing. We'll make that around the doghouse for you here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Of course, when you think about quarterbacks who know a little something about getting a lot of attention, what it's like to be in the spotlight, our good friend Jake Fromm knows all about that. So what do you say we keep that conversation going with Jake right now as we get ready to do a Kroger Fresh Take with him here today on DawgNation Daily?
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Kroger Fresh Take on the program here today. And Jake, I was sort of joking about this before. You're certainly a quarterback that's no stranger to getting a lot of attention, and perhaps at times a little bit more fame than maybe you would have even wanted, to the point where, if you're driving a vehicle, everybody's looking to see what that is and, getting a lot of attention for that. Have you seen Carson Beck's Lamborghini truck here, and what do you make of all of that?
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Thank you for having me. I was cracking up, man, hearing you talk about it, because I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, as a quarterback at the University of Georgia, like you wouldn't think you're getting, that kind of attention. You wouldn't think that just what kind of vehicle you drive is that important. But man, it is it's crazy just how things can get blown up. But yeah, being a quarterback here, stuff like that matters, and it's funny to sit here and talk about it. And yeah, it happens. And I did get to see a post about Carson and the Lamborghini, and man, it's a nice vehicle he's driving, and it'll be looking good around campus.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And what's kind of funny is there's a little bit of a cultural divide that sort of shows up around stuff like this. On the one hand, people a little bit closer to my age, some of the time they're like, well, I don't know that I want my quarterback driving a car exactly like this, a vehicle exactly like this, maybe a little too flashy, something like that. And yet people who are a little closer to your age or perhaps even younger, they love the idea of this. Give me the celebrity player, give me the fancy car, give me the glitz and glam around the Georgia program. I think it's a little bit of an interesting thing where you do get a little bit of a cultural divide here between people who might be a little older, who are like, I don't really know about this, and people who are a little bit younger who think, they're into car culture and things like that. They just think stuff like this is really fun. So you got a couple of different camps as it relates to Georgia fans on this, I think, a little bit.
Definitely. There's going to be different groups of people who have different opinions on the matter. Me personally, it's just that's not an vehicle for me. I stick my Ford F-250 Range. That's what I drive. It can get me in and out of the hunting woods, and it can do all the things that I need it to do. But man, for Carson, right on campus, I'm sure. There's some kind of deal that you alluded to, before I got on about the whole thing. And hey, man, you're in college. You're not doing a whole lot of other things, man. Drive whatever you want to drive. It's no big deal. And what it ends up helping is probably recruiting and recruiting a couple other players to come play because everybody's thinking you're making money. So if anything, it's probably going to help them on the football field indirectly.
Yeah, I'm sure from your perspective, a Lambo like that, not quite sure it goes four-wheel drive to get down to a duck blind. I'm not really quite so sure how well that worked for all that.
No, probably not. I need something I can throw stuff in the back and do a little work here around the house. So that's a different vehicle choice for me.
Well, along the lines of Carson Beck, we had a chance to hear from him a little bit this week. He was kind of talking about his mindset about coming back to Georgia, and the one thing that seems pretty cool about Carson is that he's, whatever level of attention he's getting, whether it's being as a, quarterback driving a fancy car or just being a guy that's got very high NFL aspirations, Carson seems to channel all that towards, at least based on the words that he's using right now, channeling all that towards, the idea of doing hard work and coming back and improving himself from where he was in 2023. And clearly it seemed like he had a really good time at the quarterback spot this past year. But given that chance to come back, seems like he's pretty eager to do it, both because of what he thinks Georgia can be as a team and what he thinks he can be as a quarterback. When you hear Carson speak, and I'm presuming you've also had some private conversations with him there as well, it certainly seems like to the average fan that no matter how much hysteria exists around him, Carson's focus sort of appears to be where it needs to be. Is that the sense that you get from him as well?
Yeah, I agree 100%. It would baffle me if for some reason Carson would change and do something different than what has gotten him there to this point, right? He came in, he didn't start right away. He went to work, same thing year 2, same thing year 3, and he gets an opportunity. I mean, like it would surprise the heck out of me for him to really do a 180 and switch something up rather than just, hey, I'm going to shut my mouth and go to work. So everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard, everything that I've been around him and around the building just a little bit, just looks like to me he's focused. He's ready to go in and work, and I think he's ready to have an even better year than he had last year.
One of the things we talked about a little bit this week is that Georgia, doesn't bring obviously everybody back from this past team, but they are bringing back their starting quarterback. They're bringing back, a handful of pieces along the offensive line that have some experience. They're bringing in experienced wide receivers from other places in the transfer portal. This is actually going to be a fairly experienced Georgia offense here this year. Maybe not the most experienced offense in the country, but certainly an offense where a lot of guys have played a decent amount of football. How much do you think that benefits from UG? I'm thinking about your freshman season when you were kind of learning things the first time, but Nick Chubb and Sony Michel had been there, forever, and you had guys along the offensive line in some cases who had been there, for a little while there too. When you were a young player trying to figure all this out, how much did you benefit from those, very experienced seniors who were kind of helping lead the way back then?
Yeah, to me, when we talk about where experience matters, to me, experience in offense trumps all for me personally, because I think you can get to answers quicker when you're going through day one installs. You can get through stuff faster. and on to answers later down the road that are going to show up throughout the season in October and November, late in December. And I think that benefits the entire offense. You have experience, and you know how to answer against certain defenses. You get to you have that in the game fire experience where, hey, stuff's not working, let's figure out an answer, and you know who your go-to guys are because you've seen them do it. You've seen them make plays when plays need to be made, and as a quarterback, you know who to trust when the game's on the line.
How about for you going into 2018? After that, you'd already had a year being a starting quarterback. You'd played 15 games, so you really played almost more than a first season. You played a kind of a first season plus. How much more comfortable did you feel second time through in 2018 than you did first time through in 2017? Because obviously that's going to be Carson's experience here this year. Now, he's been on campus for longer than you would have been, but a second year starting quarterback situation for him coming up. How much more comfortable did you feel in your second year?
Yeah, a lot more comfortable because it was my show. It was my reps throughout the entire off-season program. Everybody was looking at me to make the answers, make the plays, and make the calls. So I knew that all the offensive success, generally relied on my shoulders, and I knew what I had to do to make it happen. And it was something that I looked forward to, and I try to take advantage of it every snap I could.
I want to finish with this, Jake, as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today, that, you may not realize this, but when you signed with Georgia back in 2017, you and your 2017 signees were the last crop of recruits to have signing day only be in February. The year after you in 2018 and up until now, we've had early signing period, things like that. So since you came to Georgia as part of that 2017 class, the February national signing date, which is today, has just sort of grown to not really mean as much, now as it did back then. You didn't have a ton of drama for your recruitment by the time you got to signing day, but, what kind of memories do you have of signing day? And maybe, more so as a young recruit thinking ahead to what would be your national signing day, how much were you kind of into all of that back then?
Yeah, so for me, most of the experience with the whole February Wednesday signing day, I remember more as a high school early recruit than anything. I remember all my college coaches, they'd be huddled up in their offices, and they're watching all these recruits, go to, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, all these different places. And I just remember it was just a big deal, big buzz around the football program just to, figure out where everybody was going, and, get to watch, guys that you've played against go places, and you didn't know it then, but go, and either you're going to be teammates with them or you're going to go play against them for the next 4 or 5 years. So that was always fun to watch, and something I always really look forward to as a young high schooler and young recruit.
Well, Jake, I tell you what, we always appreciate your time here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. We're so glad you made that decision to come to Georgia way back then. Obviously, fond memories of your Georgia career that really kind of started from the word go once you stepped onto campus. So a good thing to always look back and reflect on. And anytime we're talking about quarterbacks, it's always great to have a former Georgia quarterback helping us do all that. We really appreciate you being a part of our Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily today, Jake. We'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you soon.
Yeah, Brandon, as always, man. Thank you for having me. Enjoy it.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And, of course, when you think about Kroger, great stuff from them when you talk about the membership opportunity at Kroger called Kroger Boost. This is a time right now when everybody needs more money, everybody needs more time, and that's what Kroger Boost provides you. More money back in your pocket, more time to do the things you enjoy. Now, how does that work exactly? Well, if you go to Kroger.com/boost, you can read all about this and learn that for yourself. But a couple of things you're going to get a chance to do is, first of all, it's free grocery delivery. You don't have to schlep all over town and pick up those groceries. Kroger can bring those right to you there. You can shop online and pick them up, have them delivered to you there for free. An incredibly convenient way to give you back more of the time that you really, really want. And also, in addition to that, how about the stuff you're already purchasing at Kroger? Well, you're going to get twice the fuel points as a Kroger Boost member for those things you're already buying. So make sure you check that out today. It's Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. And you can pick up all of that today and learn all the ways that Kroger Boost can give you more of the things you really need. Time, money, convenient experience, incredibly enjoyable. Check out Kroger.com/boost for more on that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, great stuff there. Jake Fromm, former Georgia quarterback, and our Kroger Fresh Take. And we'll do this as an opportunity to shift into our cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And man, oh man, are we getting ready for what's going to be a great time on board Allure of the Seas coming up in April. But we're also thinking about the great stuff we've already done, at least I've had a chance to do, on board Icon of the Seas back in January. Just a few weeks ago, we had a chance to do all of that, and still thinking about those fond memories of that, and just so excited about all the things that Royal Caribbean's got in store here for 2024, whether it's Icon of the Seas. In July of 2024, Royal Caribbean's going to be debuting another new cruise ship, and all the buzz you've been hearing about Icon, you're going to be hearing a lot of the buzz about that there as well. It's going to be called Utopia of the Seas. Just a really fun year for things happening around Royal Caribbean. But we would say around here, nothing going to be more fun than Allure of the Seas coming up in April. One of our great DawgNation.com commenters told me yesterday he just got back off Allure of the Seas, had a great time there on that, and that just gets me excited to celebrate this with all of you coming up in April. I had a message a moment ago from my boss about some sort of cruise details and some things we're doing, some things we're getting ready for. I'm just telling you, you can really feel it starting to get closer when you start having all these messages popping up. And if you're watching on video, you see that image there of Perfect Day Coco Cay. That is where we're going to be. That is where we're going to be going. I cannot wait to be there. Truly one of my favorite places on this planet is Perfect Day Coco Cay, and I am thrilled about being there with all of you. But it's showtime, go time in terms of getting registered for this. And around here, we have a very special travel agent who helps us with this. Her name is Jessica Slater. Now, Jessica doesn't work for Royal Caribbean. She works with Royal Caribbean. But Royal Caribbean believes that a great travel agent makes a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better. So that's why they said, hey, use Jessica as your travel agent. It won't cost you anything extra. We'll pay her to serve your needs. And that's what she does. So you can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or you can email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. Now, you can also check out the website here, royaldogs.com. That's DAWGS, royaldogs.com. And you can find out more information about the Dog Nation cruise there. All right, it's National Signing Day. Let's kind of recap some of the stuff that has gone on, or really, I guess, the only thing of note for Georgia fans that have gone on, which is Terry Bussey, the five-star athlete who had been committed to Texas A&M, stayed committed to Texas A&M. It's kind of funny how we can turn, this into news. The guy that was committed to Texas A&M never decommitted, sort of flirted with maybe going somewhere else. He did visit Georgia. We do know that. But ultimately, he stays with Texas A&M. Most people sort of expected that to play out that way, and that is the way it indeed took place. So there you go. I guess no harm, no foul when it's all said and done on that. Also, it looks like a chance for A&M to be kind of a winner in a couple of different ways today. Bussey, obviously, here, but there's also a wide receiver going later on today. Now, I won't admit, I don't know much about this dude. His name is Ashton Bethel Roman. He is, kind of a top 300-ish, somewhere in, kind of four-star-ish, range from a wide receiver. Looks like A&M may have a chance to pick him up, too. So, in addition to, not a ton going on for Georgia, there really isn't a ton going on for anybody for the most part here on this Wednesday in February, National Signing Day, but A&M already kind of holding on to Bussey, maybe going out and getting the wide receiver Bethel Roman. So the Aggies could end up being one of the few teams that could add anybody today. They may add a couple of names of note, so they could prove to be the big winners here in all this. There's also some talk about George Strait doing a concert at Kyle Field, so there's a lot of stuff happening around Mike Elko's program here right now. Chance Auburn may add somebody, but I don't know that's even that big of a recruit necessarily. So there you go on all of that. There was also a little bit of news coming out yesterday as it relates to Tennessee and Virginia, both kind of basically appealing for a, I don't want to say stay of execution. That's the wrong word to use. A temporary restraining order. That's the word I'm trying to use. A temporary restraining order against the NCAA. And we don't care about Virginia, but in the case of Tennessee, we've been following the story of, NCAA investigating related to, I guess it's the alleged private jet flight that Nico Iamaleava took as he visited Tennessee, and NCAA looking at that as sort of a NIL infraction, an NCAA rule infraction, even though in kind of the NIL age, almost all of this seems to be legal. But the NCAA sort of using the old rule book as a way of kind of trying to punish Tennessee. Tennessee wanted a temporary restraining order against this. The Vols have, kind of spoken out very aggressively against what they think is unfair treatment by the NCAA. But if you look a little deeper into this court stuff, and I do not like talking about legalese around here. I just think that's pretty boring. But if you look at this, while the NCAA sort of got the win here in so many words, and the fact that Tennessee was denied this restraining order. Certainly, the language from the judge and the official statements coming out of the court are pretty similar to everything else you've been hearing now for quite some time, which is a lot of skepticism about the amateur model overall. It just seems hard to imagine that the college athletics system, as we've understood it, is going to be able to survive all of the really significant legal challenges here right now. Some people think that's a change for the better. It is certainly a change, but I would say the evidence that it's a true change for the better is kind of lacking, and not just for the fans or media or whatever else, but for the players themselves too. I think there's a lot that still needs to be investigated, a lot of perhaps unintended consequences, but that's not the topic for today. The point is, Tennessee does not get its temporary restraining order against the NCAA. The investigation will continue, and perhaps the NCAA will eventually rule against Tennessee. But this court proceeding overall, perhaps not really being viewed as good news for the NCAA's belief that the kind of amateur model in the traditional college sports, university athlete relationship is going to be able to be a long-standing thing. So, speaking of new stuff, there's also a new, I guess, sports viewing opportunity on your way there as well. One thing we know is that sports on TV or the way we watch sports is gravitating a little bit more towards like the streaming world. We saw an NFL playoff game this year on Peacock. Georgia fans have kind of gotten used to that. SEC Network Plus for spring games, for a regular season game. It seems like there's just probably more of this coming in the future. And there's also, a little bit of a question of, okay, what's the future of watching sports with so few people now having a cable bundle, sort of a traditional, cable provider or satellite TV provider? There's just less of that than there used to be. So what's coming next? And a lot of folks wondering, when can I buy sports on kind of an a la carte basis? Well, what we've heard here over the course of the last 24 hours is there's going to be a little bit of a coming together of the big sports right holders. Not CBS, not NBC, but ESPN and the Turner stuff, which is owned by Discovery, and Fox, which, believe it or not, Disney already owns. You may not realize that. But the point is you've got a little bit of a coming together of these entities where you can get the Fox Sports stuff, the ESPN televised stuff, the Discovery stuff, which is all the Turner stuff, TNT, TBS, things like that. That's most of your sports on TV. It's not CBS. It's not going to be NBC. This is most of it. And so for some people, they may be like, well, isn't this just cable TV? In a roundabout way, it sort of feels like it is. And for other people, they're like, okay, well, this is the sort of streaming thing I've been dreaming of. But if you look a little deeper at this, I don't know that's necessarily the case because, the one thing I've always said is when sports moves to a sort of a more traditional streaming model, it's going to be more expensive than the sort of $10 a month you're used to paying for some of these subscriptions. This in itself is going to probably be, from a price standpoint, fairly close to those of you who have like YouTube TV or something like that. This is really nothing but a competitor to that. And it's not obvious that this necessarily is going to be a better overall thing. But it is some movement in the direction of streaming sports, which is something that some people have been asking for, especially those that are sort of out of the cable bundle world. One more quick story to give you here. We don't do a ton of basketball during our SEC through as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, but there is a little bit of chatter out there right now. Kentucky is not winning enough basketball games. And a guy like John Calipari, who, my gosh, they haven't had success in the NCAA tournament, it feels like forever. It seems like Calipari's relationship with Kentucky right now is perhaps a little bit strained. And you start to wonder, is he going to be able to sort of maintain that job in good standing if they're not winning more than they are right now? And what does this mean for the friction that sort of existed between Mark Stoops and Calipari before this? Stoops wanted to take the Texas A&M job, we're led to believe. A little bit of a fan revolt prevented that from happening, so now he's back at Kentucky with no real options. And, the idea of, I'm a fairly successful football coach at what is mostly a basketball school, but if Kentucky's starting over from scratch with a new basketball coach, wonder how that impacts Stoops here. Not obvious that Calipari's going to lose his job, but Calipari is not very popular with Kentucky fans right now. That's at least worth mentioning. And so we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And Listen, John Calipari's future very much in doubt, perhaps, but your near-term future can be all but guaranteed to have a good time when you enjoy our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. Boy, what a great time that is to be enjoying some Finnish Long Drink right now, whether it's the peach-flavored version here in the Peach State for a limited time, or the Long Drink Cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, 89% alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar, the traditional, which is still my favorite. I told you before I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, so the fact that I like the traditional, original version of the Finnish Long Drink, probably not a huge surprise there. The grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, this is a really cool category of beverage. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. The Finnish Long Drink sort of induction into our mind here in America, kind of comes a couple of years ago. It's been around in Finland, though, for like the 1950s. It was a part of the summer games there in Helsinki as a way of sort of celebrating that. And now is not only in America, but it's all over Georgia there, too. So many of you have tried it. A lot of you love it. And if you haven't, well, it's your time to do so. So find them online at thelongdrink.com. Check out thelongdrink.com today. So one of the things I talk about a lot around here is the impressive credentials that some of the people in our audience have. Some of you are like world travelers. Some of you have very important jobs. I'm always amazed that people who are so erudite and sophisticated spend time with someone like me who's barely literate and essentially doesn't ever really leave this box. I'm always kind of amazed that I call a studio. I'm sort of amazed that I am able to attract such impressive people. Now, to give you an example of how true that is, let me show you our golden shoe for today. You may remember on one of our shows this week, we talked about Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, talking about reading a book called How to Think About War, about a guy, and I think it's called, is it Thucydides? Is that how you say it? I still don't know how to pronounce the name, to give you an idea of, how not educated I am. Thucydides, perhaps? Well, here's what David Good writes, and I'm going to give him a golden shoe for this. BA, I have a master's degree based on the study of Thucydides. Now, how about this? We mentioned this philosopher on the show. Come to find out, we got a guy watching and listening who's got a master's degree in Thucydides. That's amazing to me. He says, I can't imagine any rational person would read this for fun, which is a very funny thing to say. So perhaps Greg Sankey really is preparing for his own version of war there. But I just wanted to show off here. I may not be very smart, and I may say stupid things all the time, but the people who are watching and listening, they are very, very smart. Somehow, some way, we make that work. So, David, we'll give you a golden shoe for that. And one day we'll let you sit us down and tell us all about Thucydides and exactly how it is that we should be thinking about war, because that's what Greg Sankey wants us to do. Speaking of war, it's a one-sided war down in Jacksonville. 1,187 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. And that is a number that is going to go up and up and up. And you don't need some Greek philosopher to tell you that. You already know it. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, I'm going to go to DawgNation.com first. We'll kind of roll through these comments, and then we'll let you get going on here. Good stuff. Let's see what else. A lot of Lamborghini talking here right now. DT says, I'm speaking Italiano. No, I don't. Oh, yeah, with the Lamborghini thing, is it? Here's what I think is funny. And I'm, as I said before, I'm not someone who is certainly multilingual. But, some of these fancy cars have, like, names that make them sound, like, really, really fancy, perhaps fancier than they actually are. Like, do y'all know what a Maserati, Maserati, right? Well, one of the popular Maserati vehicles is called a Maserati Quattroporte, which sounds like, oh, my gosh, that's so fancy and so Italian, so international. Do you know what Quattroporte means in Italian? It just means four-door. I'm driving a Maserati Quattroporte. Quattroporte makes you sound like you're, a James Bond villain or something like that. All Quattroporte means is four doors. So I don't have a ton of Italian, linguistic expertise, but I do know that some of these sort of fancy-sounding Italian things are not quite as, fancy as they really are. BMAX says, which coach is in the hottest seat? Beamer, Napier, Stoops, or Pittman? Well, I'm going to take Shane Beamer off that. I know that South Carolina didn't have a very good year this year, and Gamecocks need to, perhaps perform better on the field. But South Carolina's recruiting pretty well. I think there's actually a little bit more optimism around Columbia than you might think. Billy Napier for sure. Mark Stoops is good enough that I don't believe that Kentucky can fire him, but I do believe that Stoops would like to get a better job. This particular year, he just couldn't. Pittman, unfortunately, we love Sam, but we do believe he's probably on the little bit of the hot seat. That's probably true. And DT kind of agrees with that he's probably on the grill, unfortunately. Right, so Evaldog says that his name is pronounced Thucydides. Is that right? Thucydides. Thucydides, does that right? Thucydides? That sounds more like what it would be. Thucydides. That sounds like what it should be. Thucydides. There you go. Thucydides. See? Got a lot of smart people here. Thucydides. AJ Ferraro says, was curious about notable Missouri alumni who could have given the $62 million gift. Brad Pitt, Sheryl Crow, both graduated from there. Yeah, somehow I suspect it's probably not them, but $62 million is a gigantic donation. That's gigantic, a gigantic donation for sure. Let's see what else. Ricky says that when he was an undergrad at Georgia, he had a 67 VW Bug with a hole in the floor on the passenger side. I was happy to get where I was going back then. Different times. Yeah, indeed. Different times for sure. But also, like, a lot of these young people who aren't even athletes, they just drive nicer cars than, perhaps some of us used to, or perhaps some of us do right now. When I was younger, I was more into, like, nicer cars. I've told you all this before. Being a little bit older, I'm just not quite as into that as I, once would have been. Just doesn't mean as much to me as it once would. Not to say that I wouldn't love to have a nice car, but, you get to a point where other things, just are more important to you. Valdog says I sound more like a scholar now. Yeah, there you go. I appreciate that. Listen, I'll take any help I can get. Randy Hall already looking ahead of that class of 2025. Yeah, good momentum building for that right now for sure. Good momentum for sure. Dog Happy says I'd go to the games taking my turn and love to see Dominique Wilkins' kids playing basketball. Yeah, Dominique, a great part of the Georgia legacy. Let's see what else. Yeah, some folks having a good time in the comment section together over here. Let me go to YouTube for a moment, see how those people are doing. I'm guessing they're not quite being as friendly as these DawgNation.com folks are to each other. But you know what? That's their prerogative. They want to fight and argue with each other. That is what the comment section is there for. I will tell you, my computer's going very slow today, so I'll have to tap dance here for a minute while it loads up. But we shall see. One of these days we'll get there. Yes, here we come. Now we got it. All right, on YouTube for the R.S. Andrews cool down. Porter gives you go dogs right back to you. That's awesome to see. Andrew Hughes wondering what the phrase will be for 2024. Attack the day, keep chopping, composure. Last year is probably more about complacency, right? That was probably the one. I wonder. I mean, obviously, sometimes what we wish it would be and what it turns out to be, are a little bit different. I think a lot of us really like the idea of this being a year, about, kind of built around get it back, get back to where you were, after not being national champions this past year, finding a way to kind of get back into that, world again for 2024. Kirby, though, has a tendency to kind of avoid stuff like that because it acts as a little bit too presumptuous sometimes, and it perhaps sort of bakes in a sense of entitlement. And so my guess is that Georgia probably goes away from something like that, even though I think for a lot of us, that's what we wish, Georgia would sort of approach this as of, last year you weren't national champions. It's time to sort of get back to be, what we sort of think of now is a bit of a birthright for UGA, but that's not typically the way that Kirby Smart sort of approaches those things. So I guess we'll find out come July on that. Junkyard Dog says very brutal looking schedule for the Gators. Yeah, I say this, I think without hyperbole. I don't know that any team has ever played a tougher schedule than Florida on paper appears to be playing in 2024. I believe that's probably true. Let's see what else. Porter says he used to drive an old school Chevy. I like that. Stephen Wainwright also says that Georgia plays a very tough schedule too. And Stephen, you're absolutely right about that. Georgia does indeed play a very tough schedule. On paper, probably the toughest that Georgia, has played there as well. The only difference I would say between the Georgia schedule and the Florida schedule, now, SEC opponent-wise, Georgia may play a tougher slate of SEC opponents than Florida. I haven't examined that closely enough to say for sure on the Florida side. But what makes the Florida schedule so interesting is the fact they're playing the 3 other Power 5 opponents from their own state. And by the way, part of the reason why the Florida schedule seems so tough is because this is also in comparison to what Florida currently is, which impacts your perception there too. Johnny Surf Dog says, I can hear my college business professor saying he would be disappointed seeing us waving to him from a new car with payments. He'd rather see us waving from a paid and full old junker. So I can tell you that the day my life probably changed the most is the day I sort of figured that out. You know, like a lot of times people will sort of ask me, you know, how it is you got to have this job, you know, how did all this happen? And you can sort of go into the story and you sort of, you know, tell the story of that. But to young people who are, you know, watching or listening right now, people who are younger than I am, one of the things you need to understand is that the more control you have over your cost of living and the more you're able to kind of keep that at sort of a certain level, the more freedom it gives you to kind of take some risks and take some chances in life and sort of explore some interesting opportunities that you just can't easily do. Now, I realize this is not, you know, supposed to be a classroom, so I'm not going to do this very long, but I will just give you this for free. That people talk about, you know, chasing your dreams and things like that. You know, there are times in life when that's probably a thing that you should do. You should try to, you know, go after something. And, you know, if you've got too many payments, that becomes a hard thing to do. Now, I'm not against new cars and things like that. I'm really not. But I do think being really careful about what you take on as a monthly payment, an obligation to pay back, goes a long way towards your ability to on a dime say, I used to do this, now I'm going to do this, I'm going to pursue this dream, because, you know, you're not working for anybody else. You're not working for the person you're having to pay some, you know, large credit card bill to, or the person you have to pay the auto, you know, payment to, and things like that. So, I mean, you can go back and see me in my 20s, and you probably saw me driving a car I couldn't afford. You probably saw me trying to, you know, run up a bunch of credit card debt, try to, you know, live a lifestyle that I just didn't probably need. You know, you would have seen all that from me in my 20s. Somewhere around my 30s, you didn't see that from me as much anymore. And I tell you, you know, all the best decisions I ever made in life and the best stuff that ever happened to me in life all happened, I don't want to say as a result of that, but they certainly happened after that. Important thing to keep in mind. Andrew Hughes calls a big shot here that Lane Kiffin could be the next SEC coach to lose his job. I wonder about that. I mean, he got another extension here, I believe, this year. He gets extensions seemingly all the time. Like, Lane Kiffin's always been good at getting jobs and good at getting extensions. The one thing that Kiffin does not really have is anything in the way of a real significant professional accomplishment. He's a little bit more of sort of a job acquirer more so than he is sort of a job completer. We can't help but notice that. But this is a very interesting year for Kiffin and Ole Miss. This is a team in a 12-team world that has legitimate playoff expectations. Legitimate. If there had been a 12-team playoff this year, they probably would have been in it. And Ole Miss making a 12-team college football playoff, with all due respect to Archie Manning, you can make a case that's the most significant accomplishment in the history of Ole Miss's program. Y'all, this is a fun year in Oxford. It's a really fun year. And some of you know that I'm pretty skeptical of Kiffin as a coach. Many of you are more of a believer in his coaching ability than I kind of have been. But I've also been willing to acknowledge that he has done a better job at Ole Miss thus far than I perhaps expected him to do. But it's that next step time. Kiffin, with taking all these transfers and the guys they held on to from last year's team, with the exception of Quinshon Judkins, you can take this talented roster, especially when you think about like the top 11 starters on both sides of the ball. You can take this talented roster and have the kind of accomplishment that sort of moves Kiffin from the sort of category of famous coaches into the group of truly accomplished coaches. We had the list of the day of like top 10 coaches in college football that Jesse Simonton from On3 put out. I can't remember if Kiffin's was on that list or not. If so, it would have been near the bottom, and, you know, perhaps more of a function of his fame than the actual, you know, substance of his resume. But in 2024, that has a chance to change. Now, maybe you're right. Maybe they fall flat at that point in time. You know, maybe, you know, the Ole Miss folks who were kind of sour on Kiffin at the end of the 2022 season, maybe they're sour on him again. But for now, this is Kiffin's chance as a coach. And I don't say this pejoratively. I just don't really know a better way to say it. This upcoming season is Kiffin's chance to move off the kids' table and move to the adults' table. He sort of was more than happy to kind of put himself in a pretty subservient, obsequious role to his mentor, Nick Saban. Kind of sort of likes to sort of joke around with Kirby Smart, but not in the same category as coach as any of those guys. But in 2024, if he were to have some real accomplishments, he'd sort of be a little bit more, along those lines, I would say. Let's see what else. Nature Gator's still confident in Billy Napier, so we'll see about that if that plays out. Jonathan Aaron says, watch the McAfee show from Monday. USC coach Lincoln Riley was on, and Pat called him out his defense, said he needs to fix it. There you go. Good for McAfee there on that. Good for McAfee on that. There you go. Let's see what else is going on. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment, and then we'll come back to the comment sections. And I'll try to give you guys a good full comment section today because I know it was a little shorter yesterday. I think we have to be a little bit shorter again tomorrow too. We've just got a couple of things going on around here, but we also try to have plenty of fun too. All right, so over here on Facebook, I'll let the very, very slow working computer get its way there, and then we'll find out what folks have going on this side over here. And I hope you're all having a great day. Kent Holcomb says, I think Beck at best is leasing the Lambo, probably an endorsement deal. No way he's dumb enough to spend that much on a vehicle. Things get blown out of proportion very easily. I truly believe, as I tried to lay out before, I believe this was blown out of proportion. I don't think it's, one of the recruits says that people are lying. I don't think anybody's necessarily lying, but I do think that when it comes to NIL stuff, everybody benefits from things seeming grandiose. Makes the players seem more desired. Makes the program he plays for seem more resourceful. They're getting these NIL deals for their players. It makes the schools that lose out on these players, they can turn to their people and say, hey, what do you want from us? We couldn't get so-and-so because Georgia gave them a Lamborghini. So therefore, if you want us to be good, you got to give us the kind of money that gives us a Lamborghini. So even the schools that don't have the player still benefit from the exaggerated stuff that's out there. And that's a really important thing to understand. The media, of course, benefits from this because they get to write the story of, here's how crazy NIL is, and then they get to write the second story of, can you believe how crazy all this is based on the reporting they did about how crazy it all is. So that's the landscape that exists. And it's not necessarily a victimless crime from the standpoint, I don't mean to be super serious, but you've seen some of the stuff in the news as of late about, for a lot of people, like social media can be harmful to their happiness. And I do believe that there are a lot of recruits or a lot of players in college football, all they hear is the sort of telephone game of Carson Beck's driving a Lamborghini? Why am I not driving a Lamborghini? Does my school not care about me? Does my NIL apparatus not serve me very well? And, some of this ends up being the kind of thing that I think makes people more dissatisfied with their current situation than otherwise would be because they're believing this sort of exaggerated story that's out there. And I do believe the Carson Beck, I try to walk through step by step of this, but exactly why, this is sort of an exaggerated thing. I believe that's probably what it is. I'm not anti-Beck driving a Lamborghini. I don't believe that Beck spent $300,000 in this vehicle. I do not. Matt Rukavina says before NIL was even a thing, Bama players were seen driving Bentleys all over Tuscaloosa. We all know what that deal was. Well, I think it's kind of interesting. Didn't they announce this year they're not going to make the Dodge Charger anymore? Saban retires the same year the Dodge Charger is no longer made. But I'm obviously kidding about that. If anything, here's what I'll tell you. Not just to Georgia, but a lot of places. So I think that over the course of years, this is pre-NIL, okay? Pre-NIL, I think over the course of years, people see so-and-so football player driving so-and-so nice car, and I think some people get the wrong impression of that. Here's what I'm here to tell you. That even for like regular families, like people like me that just, not rich, not poor, just sort of living, just sort of figuring out a way to maintain and live, right? Let's say that my son was the starting linebacker at a place like Georgia in sort of the pre-NIL world. Well, back then, got his school paid for. Pretty much all the clothes that he's going to wear is the gear that Georgia provides him. all the meals that he eats are eating in then the football facility, right? He's getting a cost of living stipend because that's what came around, like 2013, 2014, something like that. A lot of these guys would also then apply for the Pell Grant. See, what people don't realize is like the average college football player prior to NIL actually had more cash in his wallet than you probably realize, because they were well within their rights to apply for the Pell Grant. That would have been money in their wallet right there. So if you're the parent of the average football player pre-NIL, everything in your child's life is currently paid for, where they live, what they eat, what they wear. They've got folding money in their pocket to go to the movies with or whatever these kids do in this day and age. And so a lot of parents are like, well, what's left for me to do? And I'm not trying to be naive here. I'm telling you this happened in some cases. So a lot of parents were looking around and like, well, I'm not paying for anything for my kid, so what's my role in all of this? So I'll buy him a car. And if I'm not paying for anything else, then buying a car for a kid's not necessarily that big of a expenditure necessarily. And so some of the stuff where you saw so-and-so's driving a truck or driving a whatever, some of that was just an example of the parents and everything else to spend the money on, so they just bought the car. And that's not just at Georgia. That's a lot of places there as well. Now, I'm not an idiot. I would say over the course of time, somebody somewhere perhaps, got an extra benefit. I'm not here to pretend that didn't ever happen. I'm just saying that some of the stuff that sort of looked like extra benefits wasn't always. Now, if it's a Bentley, then that's maybe a little bit different type of thing. But if it's like Jake said, one of these, relatively nice pickup trucks, something like that, that's not always what it appeared to be. Let's see what else. But I also believe this, and some of y'all have heard me say this before. If you want to fix everything that's sort of wrong with college athletics, what if we just went back to like sort of 1970s SMU style payments under the table? Like, doesn't that just sort of fix everything? If we're trying to figure out how to properly compensate athletes while also keeping the veneer of college sports sort of looking the way that it's looked, people like the way that it looks, whether it's actually authentic and true or not. People still like it that way if compared to Christmas. Deep down, we all know that Christmas is over-commercialized, but if we don't participate in that, then December 25th is just another Tuesday. Well, in the case of, college athletics, we can sort of sit here and, deconstruct the whole thing and be like, well, actually, this is all just a big fraud. Well, if that be the case, then Saturdays in the fall are just another day. And that's not what most of us want. We kind of like college athletics being what it is, even if what it is a little bit fake. So the way that you fix that, a little McDonald's bag here and there, and all of a sudden everything's taken care of. These opinions reflect DawgNation Daily and not anybody else's, but still, that's kind of what I think. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says that Nature Gator does nothing but troll me for attention. Shelton has more worthwhile things to say. Does he still post over here? Does he still do that? Because I don't really see his stuff. And I don't mind giving Nature a little bit of attention. I feel like, if you'll be honest, I feel like the stuff that Nature says in our YouTube comment section is a little bit more valuable than some of the stuff that he puts on Twitter. And I'm being honest here. Friends are honest with each other. I do think that Nature Gator makes positive contributions to the conversation at times on YouTube. I do think that some of the stuff that he puts on my Twitter is merely an attempt to stir some of y'all up, and I'm not as good about that. Scotty Barnes likes the idea of Lane Kiffin sitting at the kids' table. I think that's funny. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says, could the Nature Gator beat Ravishing Rick Rude in his prime? No way. Ravishing Rick Rude, underrated performer. Underrated performer. I was actually thinking about him the other day. Underrated performer. All right, let me go back around the other comment sections. Let's see what people are doing over there. B-Max says, I really think that Kirby loves recruiting. I wonder how many coaches do it because they have to. I think if you really look closely enough, B-Mac, I think you'll see the example of that. That there are clearly some people who just sort of do it because they have to. Chip Kelly's like that, I believe. Chip Kelly's been rumored. You know how like Jeff Hafley left the Boston College head coaching job to go be coordinator wherever. There was some rumor that Chip Kelly might do that too, because he's recruiting simply because he has to and not because he really wants to. There is a lot of that in college athletics, of people who just don't like it. And the thing that Kirby has figured out, and I don't know that he even knows he's figured this out, but it's fairly obvious that he has. Kirby has figured out how to play the game without being diminished by the game. I think there are a lot of coaches whose ego won't allow them to make the aggressive pitch towards players. Because, in fact, I know some coaches feel this way because I've basically heard them say it in private conversations. There are some coaches who sort of feel like, well, if I act like I'm begging for this kid, and if I act like I need him, then what does that make me as a coach? Like, they can't allow themselves, ego-wise, to be diminished to the point that they need somebody to come help them. But with that attitude, you can't recruit. Like, if you walk around like you don't need anything, you're not going to get anything. You've got to, at some point in time, make a recruit feel wanted. And so if, Kirby, who I agree with you, I do genuinely believe he enjoys the recruiting process. And this is the thing that he seems to do well. Kirby's able to convey the message to the recruit of, hey, not only would we love to have you, but we need you. There's a role we can play. You can play for us, and we can do this for you. And Kirby obviously makes these guys feel really wanted, and yet there's never that whiff of desperation. Kirby never is diminished. He's just as much of an alpha as he ever was, while also really aggressively going after these guys. That is not an easy needle to thread because, you would presume that Kirby has a big ego. We don't see a lot of outward evidence of that, but, I don't think you can do a job like that and not have pretty prodigious ego. And yet Kirby's ego doesn't get bruised by the recruiting process. And I'll take this a step further. Some of y'all need to be more like Kirby. Because here's what happens. And I tell you this all the time, and you don't believe me, but it is true. So when, KJ Bolden chooses Florida State, some of y'all are like, I never want to talk about this guy again. I never want to hear about this guy again. If he don't want to be at Georgia, we don't want anything to do with him. It's like some of y'all, and I'm not picking on you, I'm just being honest here. Some of y'all get so thin-skinned about some of these guys that choose to go somewhere else. It's like as fans, sometimes our own ego gets bruised by this. Kirby doesn't act that way. Kirby, when KJ chose Florida State, high-profile commitment, big announcement, Kirby just kept right on recruiting him. I'm led to believe that Kirby talked to him on the phone that week. They were already making plans for him to be in Athens in the fall. How many games would he get a chance to come to? How many could he come to without too many people making too big of a deal about it? There's a lot of conversations going on because Kirby didn't get his feelings hurt. Okay, KJ announced for Florida State. That doesn't stop the way we're going to recruit him, is what Kirby Smart would say. And that's a really cool thing, is that not only does Kirby enjoy the recruiting process, Kirby is so committed to the process that he doesn't need every single moment of the process to sort of validate his ego, which I think is kind of interesting. DT says, don't ask, don't get. Learn that in high school. Very good. Randy Hall calls me ravishing Brandon Adams. Let me tell you one thing. I have very little in common with ravishing Rick Rude. Certainly not the big ab reveal that Rude was famous for. I certainly would not be able to do that. DT says he knew I'd work in for some wrestling. I got to tell you, low-key, wrestling's been pretty good lately. Been watching a little bit of the WWE product. The whole Cody Rhodes thing about, will he face Seth Rollins or face Roman Reigns at WrestleMania? I think that's a pretty good story here right now. And I think there's some reality kind of mixed into that. So I'm kind of into that right now. Brooksy says last time the hedges were replaced was 1996. We're not going to have to wait 24 years for another championship. So I know they're enhancing the hedges, or are they full on replacing them all? Because in 96, they had to take them out for the soccer. People don't realize how big a soccer pitch is. That's what they call it, a soccer pitch. Soccer pitch so big they didn't have room for the hedges anymore. They'd take them out. But are they taking the full hedges out, or are they just kind of putting more sort of hedges in? I guess they're having to replace them all. They are a little weathered these days, so probably a pretty good thing to do. BMAC says, will Juju be old enough to drive? Yeah, I wonder how old he is. It's a good question. Is he 16 already? Let's see what else. Yeah, BMAX says they're replacing them all. Maybe they are going to replace them all. DT says they dug them out. If you're ever in Athens, you can go right there to the West End Zone, look into the stadium. It's free for anybody to do. Okay, so Roger Hall said he saw the picture. They are bare. They probably needed replacing. They'd gotten a little bit. It's like they look. It's like if you ever go to like one of these NFL stadiums in like the Northeast in the wintertime, the grass is sort of gone, but it sort of looks better on TV than it actually is in real life. I think the hedges were probably getting to be a little bit like that, where it's like if you tune in on TV, looks like Georgia's between the hedges. There's the hedges. You can see all that. Looks plenty green. But you got close to them. They probably were kind of in need. Maybe like the shrubs in front of my house. They were probably in need of a little TLC. That's probably true. Probably true. Let's see what else. Richard Dees wonders if the new hedges will be a good omen and lead to a successful championship season. Certainly hope that's the case. Jamie Scott says maybe Juju will like the Lambeau idea for UGA quarterback. So here's where I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here for a little bit. It's like I'm in a stage of my life now where like I'm just not at that end of the fancy cars. I'm just not, like that's not the kind of thing. Like I'm like, I'd probably be a lot, more likely to sort of drive Jake's pickup than I would be, Carson's Lambo, probably. But I don't mind Georgia having a little Lamborghini to it. I really don't. I don't think you want to be a full-on Lamborghini culture because it's not really a daily driver. At least, this one may be. I shouldn't say that. I know that for sure. But I don't think a little bit of that's necessarily such a bad thing. As I've told you before, I think you can tolerate about 15% of anything. You can have a couple of risks here and there. And you can have a little bit of celebrity culture around your program too, especially at the quarterback spot. A lot of these guys expect the quarterback to get that kind of attention. In fact, if the quarterback's not getting that kind of attention, they start to wonder, well, is this the guy for us? I don't think Carson driving a Lambo is probably a big locker room deal because I think people expect quarterbacks to get things. In fact, I've talked to all kinds of players over the years, ex-players, NFL players. When it comes to like the endorsement money and the opportunities that kind of come your way, they always know quarterbacks going to get that first. I mean, I guess if you look at the NFL, I was thinking about the top color commentators. We actually have a couple of non-quarterbacks, Greg Olson, Chris Collinsworth. But, I mean, we expect that to be a quarterback's job, right? In fact, perfect example. Greg Olson, who almost everybody says is a great analyst, a terrific analyst, is about to get demoted to number 2 because Tom Brady's coming in. Quarterback just gets the nod. And so I just think people sort of expect the quarterback to get that. So not only do I not think the Lambeau thing is necessarily a bad thing for the overall Georgia culture, if anything, if guys like Julian Lewis are paying attention, it can be a little bit of a good thing. But deep down, the actual family of the recruit, they're not getting fooled by this stuff. They know the deal. They know what's going on. Roger Hall mentioning the South Carolina game in 2019. This is one of those things that it sort of pains me to admit because I really, 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 really like Will Muschamp. I really, really do. I even liked him at the time. But we definitely around here could have made a much bigger deal about a Georgia guy letting the South Carolina team behave that way in the stadium that day. We definitely could have made a bigger deal about that. We chose not to just because kind of like Muschamp. I don't know. Maybe we gave him a free pass. But that was not a good day. That was not a good day. And I don't know that one of Georgia's own did any of us any favors that particular day by allowing some of that to go on. He's also a head coach. He's competing against Georgia, fighting for his job probably. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he was there to take whatever win he could get. But honestly, honesty compels us to admit for a guy that we really, 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 really like and have always liked, not a great day. Not a great day. Randy Hall says there's no signing day shows on TV at all. Yeah, there's barely anybody signing. There's just really not many people signing. A&M may get a couple of guys. LSU had a chance to get somebody, not Bussy, somebody else. Auburn had a chance to get somebody, and that's about it. Nebraska's going to get a couple of guys, but everything else is like group of 5 stuff. It's not just Georgia who's sitting it out today. Pretty much everybody's sitting it out today. Let me go back over to YouTube. See what they're saying over there. Let's see what else is going on over here. A little bit of G. Grace in here fighting like per usual. Let's see what else. See, I can't. Y'all doing like politics and stuff like that. I can't do that. Come on now. I'm trying to be on YouTube, and I can't quite get there. Ooh, how about this though? Our resident Alabama fan, G. Grace, and is kind of now taking a jab at NatureGator. So the axis of evil that gets formed by our resident Florida fan and our resident Alabama fan, perhaps showing some signs of cracking there. The axis of evil, a little bit of a breakup there. Memphis Dog, very funny. So DMart42 says, will you admit that DawgNation cursed the UGA basketball team? You can't pay them attention or they lose. Yes, we did this the other day. Foster Moss, who I like, called us out, and probably rightly so. We did the basketball thing on the set, and Georgia started losing games. So that's probably fair. You can put that in the same box with Brocktober and some of the other stuff we tried that didn't really work. Let's see what else. Johnny Surf Dog says, how long will the 12-team playoff go before it changes? Yeah, we briefly addressed this the other day to the extent we're capable of doing anything briefly. People don't realize this, but there is only an agreement in place with the college football playoff until 2025. Beyond that, there's not even a guarantee we have a college football playoff. Now, we probably are going to, but the college football playoff is not exactly it's not like the format is up for grabs. So could we expand teams? We probably could. Certainly there'll be some, there's going to probably be some changing around like the model of how many automatic berths there are compared to how many at-large berths there are. I know that, was it Clay Travis the other day? It was Tommy Tuberville. It was Tuberville on Outkick who was pushing. No, that's something different. Either way, there's been some talk of maybe the SEC and the Big Ten ought to combine to have their own playoff. Maybe one day that will happen. What I'm concerned with is there are a lot of times in sports where, entities sort of exist in parallel universes, and that is not what I want to see college football become. Like, do you like boxing? Do you care at all about boxing? In our lifetimes, now boxing is a little bit different now than it used to be, but in our lifetimes, so-and-so may be a Showtime fighter, and so-and-so was an HBO fighter. And if somebody had their contract with HBO, they're not fighting the Showtime guy. That just was never going to happen. I've always been a little bit afraid that college football could go the same way. I'm not saying that it will. I'm just giving you, for instance, of one of the concerns I have for the future is if the Big Ten were to come down south, if they were to grab Clemson, Florida State, some version of that, all of a sudden they're a national conference. They've got Northeastern teams, they've got Southeastern teams, they've got West Coast teams, they've got obviously a huge portion of the Midwest. At that point in time, they could perhaps say, we're just going to have our own playoff. And the football may not be as good as it is in the SEC, but we don't have to worry about that. We're going to get a nice contract to play our own playoff, and we don't have to worry about taking losses. We don't have to share the money with anybody. We're just going to do our own thing. And that would stink, right? It's like, a lot of these Big Ten teams are not capable of preventing Georgia from winning a national championship, but they could be capable of preventing a national championship from taking place, which would be a really frustrating thing, but not an unforeseeable circumstance for the sport, I don't believe. So I do get a little bit concerned about that. Maybe the story I mentioned a little earlier about the sort of working relationship that Fox and ESPN are going to have in this little streaming deal, maybe that means they're also going to cooperate more around college football, television rights too. Maybe that's the case. But, the idea that you've got two power leagues, one of them heavily involved in Fox, not the only network, but heavily involved in Fox, one of them solely connected to ESPN, that may end up being the real rivalry, Fox versus ESPN, and not anything else. So I don't know. DMar42 says only 40 minutes left. No, I can't go all the way till noon. I got to go. Excuse me. All right. Back on Facebook, and then we'll do one more quick trip around the sun after that. Making up for the fact that we did not do long comments yesterday, and we'll not really be able to do those tomorrow either. Let's see what else. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says that YouTube is good for trials and storm chasing, and that's about it. Philip Jordan Wells, who does migrate over to YouTube every now and then, says it's funny to watch it up close as those folks are fighting again, for sure. Jamie Huff mentioned the Bell kit. Is that the one that's like the is it preferred walk-on, right? Is that right? I heard a little bit about that. Jamie, if you've got more details on that. But I believe there was some talk they might add a preferred walk-on guy who was offered a scholarship by, is it Indiana? I may have like a quarter of those details correct, but give me that if you do. Johnny Prescott says that his dream car is a golf cart and an extended beach vacation. I want a golf cart so bad. And to me, here's my theory about golf carts. I would say pound for pound, for the dollar you spend compared to the luxury you get, I would say the golf cart is the most bang for your buck in the luxury category. Because while there are some very expensive golf carts, you can get a halfway decent golf cart for not, it's, in the thousands, but we're not talking about some major expenditure necessarily, and very luxurious. It's funny. It's like if you have like a 1990, compact sedan, that's priced wise more than the typical golf cart is, but the golf cart's way more luxurious for whatever reason. One of them you can drive on the road, the other one you can't. But for some reason, the golf cart, a couple $1,000s, just seems way more luxurious. I want a golf cart really bad. I want a golf cart. Jacob O'Neill says, I believe he's a preferred walk-on. Yeah, there had been some talk that Georgia might add a PWO today. And I think he was offered a scholarship by obviously most of the guys that Georgia brings on as PWOs have Power 5 opportunities, in many cases other places, and I believe this is an example of that. I bet Jeff's got some of that coming up for you. Scotty Barnes, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says that she hates streaming games. So I've said before, I'm pretty pro streaming overall. I used to be the kind of person, so you come home, you had a long day, sort of plop down on the couch, you sort of grab your remote, you start seeing what's on TV. Used to be I just sort of flip channels. I've gotten to the point now where, when I sort of plop down on the couch for a couple minutes to see what's on, I'm usually scrolling through some sort of streaming platform, never finding anything to watch, but just sort of scrolling through some streaming platform as opposed to just sort of flipping channels or going through the channel guide. So I've definitely become a lot more of a streaming person. But, Kaylee Manziel, by the way, says that today is National Girls and Women's Sports Day. So there you go. Happy National Girls and Women's Sports Day. So there you go there on that. Thank you, Kaylee, for that. Kaylee, of course, a very accomplished athlete. Many of you are aware of that. Kaylee, tremendous softball player and a number of other things there in her career. But the point was, don't like sports for streaming, or don't like streaming for sports. At least on my devices, you can't pause the streams for the most part, which sometimes in live sports you like to do, or go back and rewind it. Not an easy thing to always do. And you got a big time lag. Oftentimes it's like 60 seconds or more. I like to flip channels. If I'm watching the Braves game, I want to flip over and see what's happening over here, or something like that. Once again, spinning wheel of death, not always easy to do in the streaming world. So I don't think it makes you excessively old-fashioned if you're not a huge fan yet of the streaming situation for sports. So I'm kind of right there with our commenter in the standpoint that I've kind of become fairly immersed in streaming culture, but still not a huge fan of it for sports. Lucy also pointing out they're way behind real time. Yeah, for some of y'all that live bet, you need to know that. The sports book knows a lot more about the game that you're betting on than you do if you're live betting. You just need to understand that. Good to see our buddy Brady Pest Management in the comment section here today. You always love that. Oh, yeah, DeMarco Thomas mentioned that there was about thank you, DeMarco. That's a good point. That Juju did put the thing out the other day about not being able to find his truck in the Atlanta airport, so maybe that does mean he's driving. That's a good point. Maybe I guess it means he is 16. Did I tell you all my theory on this, though? And maybe we'll get some follow-up on this. I don't think Juju's truck got stolen. 99% of the time when somebody thinks their truck got stolen at the airport, they just can't find it. I mean, I'm telling you, someone who's lived in Atlanta for a long time, and if Juju's watching right now, go back to the airport. I bet you find your truck. 99% of the time when you think it's stolen in the airport, it's not. The airport parking lots are kind of tricky these days. Plus, if you're flying Delta, the economy lot in the south terminals, torn up anyway. Not a whole lot of car thieves looking to pay the daily rate at the Atlanta airport on something like that. Brady also pointing out air tags. If you live in Atlanta, you need one in your car truck. That's actually a really good idea, Matt. Really good idea. I like that. Although, because listen, you got a lot more. Obviously, it seems like the car theft type thing and sort of life in general is happening a lot more. I'm not saying that car thieves don't exist. I'm just saying, typically speaking, at the airport, it's usually a lost car more than anything else. Philip Wells says that he got. He says Hartsfield Jackson is wide open for thefts. I guess, but I mean, like I've also taught a lot of security there over the years that people think their car got stolen when it didn't. But maybe you're right. Maybe you're right, Philip. Johnny Surf Duck says the chat on slow news days is off the rails. See, this is what happens. When National Signing Day is kind of a dud, we're talking about cars getting stolen. Like we've just been all over the place for sure. Sports on streaming, for sure. Memphis Dog says he always parks in Dunwoody and takes Marta to the airport. Listen, while you're doing that, you might as well stay in one of these great Dunwoody hotels and make your friends at Discover Dunwoody happy too. There too. Johnny Surf Dog says it's 42 in Jacksonville today. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. So tomorrow, when I get off early, remember, we did a marathon here right now. I basically took comments longer than y'all made comments today. I outlasted all of you today. So just keep that in mind if tomorrow we get off quick, because we're going to need to, because we got some stuff going on. And keep this in mind there as well. Our friends at R.S. Andrews want to take good care of you. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs are all about that. You got some sort of electrical emergency. You've got, these things that happen around your house. Goodness knows, I don't know how any of that stuff works. The stuff behind the walls that you can't see, I have no idea how any of that works. Our friends at R.S. Andrews, though, have dedicated their life to knowing how that kind of stuff works, and they want to do great work for you. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day there as well, and trust them on all of that. And we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by, it says right there behind me, Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then. See you tomorrow, everybody.